With the release of Age of the Ring 8.0, the mod is much larger than ever before, with tons of new units and heroes scattered across multiple game modes and mechanics, such as adventure factions, the new inns or auxiliary camp system, and War of the Ring. While this is very exciting, it can also be a bit intimidating to take those very first steps into BFME modding. So with that in mind, this video will introduce the most basic modding concepts and take you through a few practical examples. By the end, you'll be able to add your favorite rams and spiders back to some new homes, or finally turn the Gondorian barracks into the Gondorian barracks as it should have been. Let's jump right in. Battle for Middle-earth, and therefore Age of the Ring, is coded primarily with ini files. Ini files are just a type of text file, so in order to access them, we can use most text editing softwares out there, like Notepad. We'll be using Notepad++ for this tutorial, and we'll provide a download link in the video's description, but feel free to follow along in any editor you may prefer. Navigating the mod files is the most fundamental skill you'll need to start modding. For instance, say we wanted to add a unit to a faction, a simple modification. Every unit, horde of units, hero, and structure has an object in the code. An object is like a bucket, and it holds all sorts of attributes and stats. And if we know its name, we can move it around. Let's see what this looks like. As an example, let's find the object name for the Arbiters of Zagur together in the code. First, let's get set up here. I have my file explorer on the left, and Notepad++ open on the right, ready to go. We'll start by navigating to the Age of the Ring folder. This is where the mod is installed, and it should be in your Programs file folder. When I mention the AOTR folder from here on, this is what I mean. Next, go into your Data folder, and then the ini folder. There's a lot of juicy stuff in here we can touch on later, but for now, go to the Object folder. Every object is compiled into subfolders from here. First, they're divided into Evil Faction and Good Faction, and then into Units, Hordes, and Structures. Unit objects are heroes, as well as the individual characters within a horde. The horde gets its own ini file in the Horde folder to handle how the units behave as a group. This is where we'll go to find a battalion of the Arbiters of Zagur, so let's go into Evil Faction, and then Hordes. Now we'll see the different factions, some with names you might not expect, and some smaller groups of units that get their own bucket. But let's open up the Harad folder now to find the Arbiters. All of the files here should be reasonably named, so it won't take us long to find the Arbiter of Zagur Horde.ini and open that up in our text editor. A Horde's ini file contains the game object, which is usually listed right at the top. And as we said earlier, an object is like a bucket for all sorts of stats. A Horde object has code for its build cost, build time, how many units it contains, how those units are arranged, and any special abilities. But for now, all we really wanted to find was this Horde's object name. This same process applies to finding individual units or heroes. In this case, we would use the Units folder as opposed to the Hordes folder. For example here, let's find the version of Kamul that's in the Rune Adventure faction. We'll go to our AOTR folder, Data, ini, Object, Evil Faction, just like before. This time, though, we'll open up the Units folder, and then the Rune folder. And there oh. Wait, did I delete him? Was he never there? Is my mod broken? Should I
spam every Discord channel I can get my hands on until somebody hands over Horde Kamul?
Oh wait, no, he's right here. Rune Kamul. Yeah, open it up, and yep, there's his name. Whew. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of extra digging, or maybe even a lot. Patience and a clear goal will help you get through most troubles you come across, and solving them can be the most rewarding parts of modding. Alright, let's pause there and go explore for yourself some other unit or horde or even structure object names in the code, just to get familiar, and we'll be back with the next section in just a second. Alright, let's start actually modding something. A quick disclaimer, you may want to back up your game files somewhere, in case you delve too greedily and can't figure out how to revert your changes. This is good practice for modding of any kind. Adding a hero unit to a faction is one of the simplest changes we can make, and often a really fun one. So, to get some practice, let's add good old King Amroth Umdirian, the Second Age hero from the Last Alliance War of the Ring scenario, to our regular Lothlorien hero lineup. The heroes a player can build when in a regular skirmish match is dependent on that player's faction. Yes, I know. Yeah, obviously, Jarian. Well, you'll see what I mean later on. To add a hero, we need to go into a new ini file called Player Template Ini, and we can find it by going into the AOTR, Data, ini folder, and scrolling down. If you feel so inclined, you can also use your File Explorer's search function, but just know that when you're learning, it can be valuable to see all of a folder's contents. Okay, so let's open up this player template ini in Notepad++ and take a look around. Listed here is every faction in the game. You can see some player templates, such as faction neutral, exist to help manage the behaviors of neutral units and aren't actually playable. Similar to Horde and unit faction names, the factions might have names you wouldn't expect. Here's a quick table to show you which ones are which, but with a little searching, you could figure it out yourself too. Before we get to the fun stuff, let's also touch on the structure of this kind of file, because as we said before, ini files are the coding blood for this game, so it's helpful to know how they work. An ini file organizes information into sections, with headers, like player template here, or object, back in the previous examples, and an end line to define the boundaries of that section. In between these bounds are a series of key-value pairs, with the key, or attribute, on the left, and the value on the right. To get a basic understanding of this relationship, let's use faction elves as an example, before we get to adding our hero. So here we are, in the player template used for Lothlorien. There's a lot of good stuff in here, but let's look at a few simple attributes that have a clear impact to gameplay. Here's starting building. When the game loads a skirmish match with Lothlorien as a player, one of the many things it needs to know is what structure object do I need to find and place at the spawn point. To know this, the game reads this ini file and goes directly to this section, Faction Elves, because Lothlorien was chosen. Then it searches for the key, called Starting Building, and it will attempt to use whatever value is given here, in this case, Elven Fortress. This is the object name for the Lothlorien Fortress. Similarly, the game wants to know what objects to start the match with, and where to place them, which is why the two builders you start every match with are listed here. As you might guess, manipulating these values is the main way that we can mod the game, because we can use them to point the game towards all sorts of new things. Okay, and in that spirit, enough lecturing. Let's add a hero and finally mod something. Pause the video here and try to locate the object name for King Amroth. I'll give you a hint. Last Alliance. Okay, do you have it? We're looking for Second Age Amroth with no spaces. Excellent. Alright, back to player template ini. Like with the fortress, the game is looking for one of the attributes in this section to know what heroes to offer the player. It's called Buildable Heroes MP. Thankfully, at one point or another, a game developer or modder left us a handy comment warning us about a potential bug. A comment is a line of code that starts with a special character like a slash or semicolon that gets ignored by the game, so it's particularly useful when trying to mod things. This attribute has multiple values, and apparently the order matters. So let's add Second Age Amroth towards the end of this list to avoid the create a hero bug. Alright, and now when we run the game, we'll see that Amroth's button appears between Celeborn and Galadriel. Okay, one important caveat to remember. If a faction has a hero or heroes that are locked by certain upgrades or structures, such as Imrahil in Gondor, or the twins for Rivendell, Gothmog, etc., the placement of that hero in the order of the Buildable Heroes MP line is crucial to that functionality. So make sure when you're adding heroes to factions, you always add them after the locked hero in the code. And because Erebor has 2 eras worth of heroes, it's maxed out and can't have any more heroes added. Both of these issues can be fixed with command set edits, but we won't cover that in this tutorial. Now it's time to try your hand at adding some other heroes to other factions and see how you get on. For super bonus points, see if you can't figure out how to start the game with a particular unit already under your control. I'll give you 2 hints. Remember the difference between a unit and a horde object, and maybe for this one, you only need 1 builder to start. Good luck! Alright, let's move on to our last modding goal for this tutorial, adding an existing horde to a different faction. This is more complex than just adding an object name to a list somewhere. Remember when I said, the heroes a player can build when in a regular skirmish match is dependent on that player's faction? And it seemed super obvious? Well, it makes sense in our brains as players that when we play as a specific faction, there's a roster of units available to us in that match. When I load up a Dol Guldur game, I know I'll be able to spam some Broken Rabble, Spiders, Risen Dead, and so on. So it would follow, if I want to use Spider Riders too, I just need to add them to a Dol Guldur unit list. Makes sense, right? But the game doesn't actually think that way, only for heroes. We've already been to the player template ini file where, sure, we can add heroes to the list, but the game is never going to look there to see if you want to play with some Spider Riders. Instead, the ability to recruit Spider Riders has to be attached to a command button object, And that button needs to be added to a command set, and a command set with that button needs to be assigned to each instance of the spider layer we want to purchase them from. Yeah. So let's break that down, right? Working backwards, we'll start by looking at the spider layer's ini file. We know how to find that at least. Data, ini, object, evil faction, and now structures, Dol Guldur, and oh, it's not called spider layer, is it? Nope. We're chill. It's right here, Guldur spider layer. Now, having the object name is great. We will definitely need that later. But let's scroll or search for another important attribute that most structures and units have, the command set. A command set's purpose is to define what a unit or structure's abilities are, and to put them in a specific order. They're represented by the in-game menus of recruitable objects, researchable upgrades, and special abilities. But in the code, they're essentially just a list of command buttons to display. Due to the nature of object-oriented programming, this file only refers to the command set's values by its name. If we want to see what this actually contains, we're going to need to look elsewhere. In our File Explorer, let's head back to the AOTR folder and follow our typical path, data and ini. Luckily enough, the file we need is quite appropriately named, CommandSet ini. Let's open this up, and with Notepad++, it's nice that we can easily flip back and forth between the files we're working on. I would strongly encourage us here to finally use the search function, if you haven't already. Lots of ini files in the game, including this one, are massive. This one holds the command set information for every unit, structure, and horde in the game, so scrolling through is not really a good option. And since we're good little modders, we already pulled up the name of the command set we're looking for, so let's Control F and search it now. You'll see that, like with player template ini and the horde inis that we've looked at, CommandSet ini also uses the header, key value pair, end format to define its objects, which are called command sets. In this case, each value is the name of a command button object, and the attributes help determine the order in which those buttons are displayed in-game, starting with attribute 1 at the noon position and going clockwise. This ordering also applies to the buttons in the bottom left Palantir menu, but in a slightly different way, and we'll touch more on this later. So now what? We've read some code and we've seen some stuff, but how close are we to getting our spider riders to be available in-game? We know now that when playing the game, if we click on a Guldur spider layer, we'll open up its command set, which we can see here in its in-game rendering. But if we want to see the option to build spider riders in this menu, we're going to need to add that option to the command set in the code. And since the value for each line of code in a command set is a command button name, yeah, you guessed it, we're going to need to go hunting for a button that'll recruit our spider riders. To the mod files. Once again, let's navigate to our data ini folder, and this time we're going to command button ini. Okay, this file is massive. Finding a button that will recruit the spider riders would be a needle in a haystack situation here, but I have a shortcut for us. Let's go back to File Explorer, scroll back up, and now we're going into Object, Evil Faction, Hordes, Dol Guldur, and opening spiderriderhorde.ini. Let's grab their object name, copy it, and go back to our command button ini. Let's Control F, paste in the horde name, and see what we get with Find Next. And voila! There's already a button in the code that does exactly what we want. The command attribute is set to unit build, and the object attribute is the exact name of our horde object. We can quickly scan these other attributes too to see what other properties this button has. For options, Cancelable allows us to right-click this button in-game to undo recruitment. Very handy. Text label and descript label point to string values in the lotr.str file, and these appear in-game as the tooltip. Button image points to the image file for the button. Show production count means the game will render a number on top of the button, showing us how many hordes we've purchased. This is useful for unit building buttons like this, but it would be turned off for buttons that research upgrades, for instance. Now, these two are very important for this tutorial. Radial being set to yes means that we will see this button hovering above the structure in-game, and in Palantir means we will also see it as an option in the Palantir to the bottom left in the HUD. Remember these. Amazing. Okay, now that we have the button's name, let's copy it and go back to CommandSet ini. But before we can add our button, we need to understand how the attributes for a command set affect the Radial and Palantir menus. Let's take a look. Here we have our Palantir menu for a level 1 Guldur spider layer on the left, and the Radial menu on the right. Below them is a copy-pasted version of the command set in Excel, and I've gone ahead and looked up the Radial and in Palantir attributes for each of these buttons in Command Button Ini. Now, immediately we notice that only 3 buttons exist in the Radial menu, while there are 6 buttons in the Palantir. This makes sense, since we know Radial has been turned off for the 3 buttons that we can't see. We mentioned before that both of these menus have different rules for how they order their buttons, so let's dig into that. The Palantir has 6 slots, no more and no less, and each slot is assigned a number, 1 through 6. This slot will always show the button assigned to slot 1, and this one will always show the button assigned to slot 6, and etc. The Radial menu works a bit differently. Instead of hard coding slots, button placement is relative, defined in ascending order, starting at the noon position and going clockwise. So in this case, buttons 3, 4, and 5 are in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd position. And of course, the buttons with Radial equals no are not included. Jarian, I don't really care about all this. Can't I just paste the button in and ride my spider all the way to the bank? Well, yeah, you could just slap 7 equals command construct Guldur spider rider at the end of the command set and call it a day. That would work. But with modding, sometimes Melkor is in the details, and I have an example here I want to show you. These screenshots are what happens if I were to take the Construct Guldur Great Spider button, which was originally in position 4, and change it to 14. Notice that in the Palantir, which we remember is hard-coded with the numbers 1 through 6, no longer has a button in position 4 at all. Even though this button still has in Palantir equals yes, it does not occupy a required slot to be in the Palantir. In the Radial menu, however, something different has happened. We still have button number 3 at the top position, but now button 5, the upgrade button, has moved in 4's old slot. The Radial menu will backfill missing slots, unlike the Palantir. It even skips positions 6 through 13 to put the now button 14 in the 3rd place. If we were to go with our hasty example and put our Spider Riders at button 7, it would look similar to this, with the Spider Rider Recruit button coming after the upgrade button, which, while functional, breaks the widely accepted BFME button placing etiquette. Now, if you say, okay, Jarian, I get it, I'll put it in the middle where I want it and shift the other numbers up, you're basically there. There's just one last detail to pay attention to. Okay, I lied, there's 2, but we're so close, so wake up now if I've lost you, because we're about to do the thing. Let's do it together. In CommandSet Ini, we still have our Guldur Spider Layer command set up. I want to put the Spider Rider button as the last recruitable unit, but I want it before the upgrade button, so between 4 and 5. We'll create a new line, and I'll enter 5 for now. Now equals, and paste our button name right in. We can go back to Command Button Ini for this if you lost it. And of course, we can't have 2 5s, but here's one of the details I mentioned. If we push these numbers up, the Command Cell button will become button number 7. Which we know now doesn't have a place in the Palantir. Palantir only goes 1 through 6. And this button doesn't have a Radial option, so if we assign it to 7, there would be no way in the game to sell your spider layer. So instead, we're going to push our upgrade button to 7. This is the highest numeric value with a Radial value of yes, so it's guaranteed to be last in that menu, while keeping the demolish button in the place it always is. The second detail I promised is that if we scroll down just a bit further, we'll notice that the next couple command sets are also for the spider layer. This may be an aha moment for some. When a structure is upgraded and levels up, its entire command set is actually changing. So unless we add our button in a similar way to the level 2 and level 3 command sets, our Spider Rider button will actually disappear when we upgrade the building. So let's add these in a similar fashion to the higher level command sets. And there you have it. An entirely new unit is now available in your game. And it doesn't stop here. Believe it or not, command set editing or switching is one of the most powerful BFME modding tools you can know. It gives you a lot of creative control over your modding project. And we only used it here to add units to factions, but this same technique applies to unit and hero abilities as well. That's the end of this tutorial. Let's recap everything we discussed. We know how to navigate the mod files and find the ini file and object names of any unit, hero, horde, or structure. We can add a hero to any faction except Erebor using the hero object name and player template ini. Within the ini files for all of those different objects, we can also find their command set and look that up in CommandSet Ini. We can research the buttons within a command set using their name and searching Command Button Ini. And we can add or remove buttons and abilities from command sets, and understand how this will affect the in-game menus. For a good exercise to see how your skills are coming along, try to recreate your own version of the old vanilla Men of the West faction, using Gondor as a template. Add a few Rohan heroes to the lineup, and some Rohan units to some Gondorian structures. The Gondorian Builder's command set is already quite full. Have you noticed where the button to build Gondor's fortress has to hide? But perhaps you could swap in the Rohan stables and add the Gondorian cav to that object. See what you can come up with. But of course, whether you're new or experienced, don't forget to back up your files. And join us with the link in the description over on the T3A Modding Discord server to talk shop and learn a whole lot more. Thanks for watching and happy modding!